Jane had seen it all in her years as a neonatal nurse: fragile newborns fighting for life, scared parents praying for miracles, and the harsh reality of babies left behind. But nothing could have prepared her for the baby boy in the corner crib, the one no one came for. A child abandoned at birth, a decision made in a heartbeat, and a truth so shocking it would leave her breathless a decade later. It all started on a quiet evening shift when Jane first laid eyes on him. A tiny, beautiful baby boy, barely 3 days old, lying in a hospital crib without a single visitor. He wasn't like the other babies. He was too silent, too observant, as if he already knew he had been left behind. Days turned into weeks, and while other newborns were taken home by their excited parents, this little boy, Isaiah, remained. No one had come forward, no phone calls, no trace of his birth parents. Just an empty space where his family should have been. Jane couldn't ignore the aching in her chest. She had cared for countless babies, but this was different. Every time she held Isaiah, he curled his tiny fingers around hers, as if begging not to be alone. And when social workers arrived, ready to take him into the unknown world of foster care, Jane made a decision that would change everything. "I'd like to adopt him." She had never spoken those words before, and yet in that moment, she knew. This child was meant to be hers. The adoption process was exhausting. Background checks, interviews, home visits. Every step felt like an uphill battle, but she pushed forward, knowing that if there was even the slightest chance she could give Isaiah a home, it was worth the fight. And finally, after months of uncertainty, she heard the words that made her heart soar. "Congratulations, Mom." Life with Isaiah was everything she had hoped for and more. At 5, he was a bundle of energy, always questioning the world around him. At 7, he started asking why his skin was darker than hers, and she reassured him that love, not blood, made them family. At 10, he was bright, thoughtful, and full of dreams. But one question never faded. "Mom, do you know where I come from?" Jane had little to give him, just a couple of names and the knowledge that his birth parents had disappeared. It was enough to satisfy him for a while, but everything changed one fateful evening. Isaiah came home from school, his face dark with frustration. He had been teased, called the adopted kid, and this time it hurt. "Do you know who they are?" he asked again, this time with urgency. Jane hesitated, and then, for the first time, she made a decision that would lead her down a path she could never turn back from. She started digging. Late into the night, she scoured hospital records, cross-checked birth registries, and searched for any trace of the parents who had left Isaiah behind. A single name stood out: Harriet, listed as an emergency contact, a name she had never noticed before. It was a slim lead, but it was enough. When Jane knocked on the door of an old house on the other side of town, she wasn't sure what to expect. But when the door opened, and an elderly woman stood before her, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. "Yes, my daughter Catherine had a baby 10 years ago," Harriet admitted, her voice laced with sorrow. "But I don't see our family in him." Jane's stomach twisted. What did she mean? Harriet's words haunted her for days. Could there have been a mistake? Was Isaiah really Catherine's son? Or was there something far more sinister at play? And then, just as she thought the past had been buried, the doorbell rang. 2 strangers stood on her doorstep, a man and a woman, anxious, desperate. "We're sorry to show up unannounced," the man said, "but we've been looking for years." Jane's heart pounded. "We believe our son was switched at birth." The words hit her like a freight train. Switched at birth. They explained everything. How their son, Elijah, had undergone genetic testing and the results didn't match. How a deeper investigation had revealed records that pointed to an alarming possibility. The baby Jane had adopted might not have been the one she thought. Jane turned to Isaiah, her heart breaking. If they were telling the truth, then the child she had loved for a decade might not be Catherine's son, but theirs. And the boy they had been raising all these years? He was the child Catherine had abandoned. Everything Jane thought she knew was unraveling. The DNA test results arrived days later, and the truth was undeniable. Isaiah was not Catherine's son. He was Henry and Victoria's, and Elijah, the boy they had raised, was Catherine's abandoned child. Shock, confusion, grief. What were they supposed to do now? Both families were shattered by the revelation. The law was clear. Biological rights belonged to Henry and Victoria. But Jane had raised Isaiah for 10 years. How could she possibly let him go? The tension was unbearable. But one thing became clear. No one could simply walk away from this. In the end, they made a decision that defied expectations. Instead of tearing the boys apart, they built something new, something no one could have predicted. A blended family, bound not just by blood, but by love. Jane remained Isaiah's mother in every way that mattered, while Henry and Victoria became part of his life. Elijah, too, started visiting Jane, eager to understand the woman who had unknowingly taken him in at birth. It wasn't easy. There were tears, struggles, and hard conversations, but love found a way. One evening, as Jane tucked Isaiah into bed, he looked up at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you regret it?" She smiled through her tears and kissed his forehead. "I'd do it all over again," she said softly, "because no matter what, you'll always be my son." But deep in the back of Jane's mind, a question lingered. If Isaiah had been switched at birth, who was responsible? Because mistakes like that don't just happen. Someone, somewhere, knew the truth, and they had stayed silent for 10 years.